Thank you, Susan. Thank you for the kind words. As a former regulator, I've got to make a disclosure immediately. I have got an Australian passport, but we're going to throw that away today. And I'm going to trade under the British passport, if nothing else, for sympathy with Brexit. But young Nick also had a British passport, didn't you, Nick? And you had to give it away in a different political life. Look, I've got 15 minutes to take you all around the world and give you some global drivers in pension reform. I'll speak very loudly and I'll be full of emphasis and full of excitement because I believe in pensions, I believe in planes, and I just believe in the fun of this topic, so much so that I was trying to explain to our board, why am I going this far and this far back? And I said, the view I have, which is quite unusual, is that why is New Zealand public policy shaping Irish policy in pensions and UK policy in pensions? And yet when I come and talk in New Zealand about this, people just look blankly at me going, what are you talking about? Last Thursday at the Brookings Institution, Nobel Prize winner Richard Thaler was talking about New Zealand pensions and saying how fantastic this is. Get real, New Zealanders, be proud, come on. You know, Thaler is good, Thaler is strong. But the critical thing though, ladies and gentlemen, is people are worried more about living too long than dying too soon. For the neoliberals in the audience, and I know some exist, for those neoliberals out there, I am going to talk invariably about the issues of women, because I did work for the Office of Status of Women when I was a regulator. But I also am going to stress that we must think about people are worrying about living too long and exhausting their retirement savings. Governments all around the world, I was in Sweden last month, I was in Ireland, as you know, and I was also in France, are all concerned about this issue of disruption and economic social cohesion. The Yellow Vest movement. I love these guys. These are the Premier League of protesters. I sat in a coffee just watching these folks chucking stuff around. And I asked one, what are you protesting about? And they said, we want solidarity again. Solidarity again. So, and I said, solidarity in what? He said, pensions. I went, uh-huh. So you were a train driver, were you? He said, yes, I was. I retired at 53. 62% of my final salary. What's wrong with that? And I said, well, how did you get to the 62%? Because it's under the 1953 Act that had engine and fire stokers, and he was classed as a fire stoker. There was no fire stokers on the metro. So what we see around the world, ladies and gentlemen, is hard compulsion auto-enrolment, tax incentives. There's now an acceleration of transition from DB to DC in Ireland, where it's moving quite quickly, the pay-as-you-go impact. Infrastructure, bless. Infrastructure. I think I heard claps about infrastructure, but I could get it wrong. Why is it that the United States, Canadian, Australian pension funds own 80% of the airports in the United Kingdom? Hello, there's something going on here. Yes, you guessed it, infrastructure is being mobilised. And then what is happening here, which is an notable political thought, as a former political advisor, is that the politicians are getting onto this, where they're saying, wait for it in the UK, let's allow the increase in prices or fees and charges on pensions to be increased to allow more infrastructure to be channeled by pension funds. Wow. So what we're saying is, why is it, ladies and gentlemen, that the politicians in Australia are saying we should recycle our assets? Okay? Or we wanted to sell our assets, go and sell them to super funds, and then move out to the outer suburbs with bigger train sets, so to speak. Social activism, I talked about intergenerational issues. Millennials, we have a fund in Australia called Spaceship. Nick, this Q, Nick calls it space something else, but Spaceship has generated 240 million Australian dollars in investment at 1.6% for largely millennials using Facebook, you guessed it, LinkedIn and Instagram. They love it. Well, want to invest in that Tesla thing. That's great. Great. Mr. Musk, he's having a great old day today. But, you know, what we're saying is, are the millennials really caring for this thing called work? Are they preferring to work, then go on holidays, come back, work, and then go on holidays? The other thing that's really interesting around the world is this low interest rate environment and the infrastructure considerations, the economic impact in Europe, certainly a Brexit, this thing called Brexit. You best it, it's just great, I just forget about it now. Economic slowdown in China, it's a worry. But I'd leave you with this thought. There is a global decline in paternalism. If you go and talk to employers in Rolls-Royce, which I do, or go and talk to British Airways, they have little of any interest in being paternalistic and looking after their employers because they think it is a scale and a transactional operational cost gain. We are competing globally, and how can we afford employee benefits? But I hear the audience out in the audience, I hear what is happening with investments around the world, everybody. Well, I would argue, is pensions about the sole purpose test? Are we just really trying to maximise rates of return? We should be just worried about that. Well, no, because you guessed it, what's happening around the world is this thing called ESG, and broader social issues are coming into play now, certainly in Europe, UNPRI directives. And what we're seeing, ladies and gentlemen, is legal cases in the US Supreme Court where 401k funds have not invested wisely enough in social issues to reflect their membership. You say, wow, that's great. But also there's legal cases going through, it's in the circuit of Virginia right now, where 401k members have sued the provider because, you guessed it, they haven't invested in smoking, alcohol, tobacco, defence stocks because of this ESG policy, but yet these stocks are generating higher returns than these other stocks they're being invested in. So there's a tension. And also these alternate infrastructure, whether it be clean energy, is growing as well. And what I'd leave you with is this thought of risk propensity and tolerance. Are we seeing across the world, ladies and gentlemen, what I call the democratization of risk? Your mums and dads, your grandparents possibly used to have defined benefit schemes in this country. Lovely things. They used to retire on a fixed salary or a fixed percentage of their income. It was great. Well, those things largely don't exist much, and we certainly don't exist in Australia, where only the judges, you guessed it, the judges have defined benefit schemes. There used to be the military, but they used to be able to shoot you, the judges sentence you. But that's a real trend that's going on. So there's a tension with investments between stakeholders and the members, and that's important to consider. So, hey, the United Kingdom says, in 2011, 2010, let's do auto-enrolment, and the country they use is New Zealand as the example. New Zealand was seen as the panacea. New Zealand is the great hope for the UK because it didn't want to do compulsion. They had an inquiry, Nick and I were with Adair Turner, great bit of work. The Adair Turner report, 2 years, estimated to be £42 million of spending, researching the hell out of pensions for 2 years, bless him. And what have they concluded? You guessed it, ladies and gentlemen, let's go and make 5% employee contributions and 3% employer contributions. That all sounds great. That all sounds great. And what they wanted to do was auto-enrolment, like New Zealand. Let's make it difficult to opt out. Let's use that behavioural finance. But if you're an employee, the contributions in the last 3 years have gone from 1%, 3% to 5% in a pretty much a low productivity growth environment, low real wage growth environment as well. So that's pretty tough. There's been minimal opt-outs, but like in New Zealand, they don't record clearly the cessation or the contribution holidays that are occurring. Price capping, you guessed it, wow. And find another country that does this, 75 basis points. Can't charge anything more. It's the vanilla solution, of course. People in the UK talk about, yes, smart defaults, but they also talk about less so returns, its charges. The UK, bless it, created a state quango. I love quangos. Quango, yes. How much does that quango create? The National Employment Superannuation Trust. How much is the loan? Well, in 2026, it'll owe $1.29 billion. We hope that it'll pay it back. We're not sure if it'll pay it back, but I'm a taxpayer, I'm a shareholder, I want it paid back. But they'll pay it back in 2041. Oh, well, it's a social good. But the Brits have said, no, this annuity stuff and this compelling people who put into annuitisation at 75, get out of that. Let's get into pension freedoms. It sounds great. If you want to mobilise the elderly population to vote for you, Osborne was clever. His advisors, the cat and him, were the only people who knew about this policy. And when it was announced on budget day, what it allowed people to do was at 55 started to take their pensions more flexibly. So what has increased? What Tor Financial has been tracking for the last 5 years is proxies. Cars, caravans, conservatories and construction. All have exploded. The Brits love a caravan, and more importantly, they love a conservatory. And they've all exploded. 6 months to get to a conservatory in my neck of the woods. But not much discussion about replacement rates, not much discussion on guarantees, and hence this thing called collective defined contribution schemes from the Netherlands, from Denmark, are coming into play. Things I leave you with is the thought of dashboard developments. The IAD runs your dashboards, a nice little simplistic thing, appreciating your pots of retirement money. The Brits are agonising about this. They're throwing millions and millions of pounds at the concept of allowing everybody to have the ability to track all their retirement savings in the United Kingdom on one screen. Good luck with that. But the number of providers is much smaller in the UK. It's actually condensing the number of providers of auto-enrolment solutions. You do not have 31. You'd have probably less than 10 now in the UK. Okay, so what's happening in Ireland? Let's go to Ireland. I've spent 6 years of my life in Ireland, bless. My middle initial is O, and I'm using David O. Harris. I'm part of the O. Harris tribe more and more effectively, but I'm not Irish. But I guess it's helpful to trade like that. But the critical thing with Brexit is going to happen to the Irish economy is it's going to flatten. It's going to like smash because 40% of their trade go through the UK, and that's a challenge. But it will remain in the EU. But what it means is there's also considerations, the EU standards, IOP2 it's called, and this is a policy that encourages auto-enrolment savings through well-run schemes. So the responses have been to the auto-enrolment consultation. It's called the straw man. Nick and I had never heard of this before. Straw man, we go, hey, should it be straw person? You know, we're sensitive Australians. Come on, I said it's straw person. But they called it straw man. And what it meant was essentially a carbon copy of the New Zealand KiwiSaver model. Be impressed. They've just said, we want this. This is the best. Australians like me are going, hey, you should really do this Australian thing. Nah. What they liked about New Zealand was as follows. They liked how there was fee compression going on. They liked how there was an element of employee choice. They liked how there was a dashboard or a hub. And wait for it, what they talked about in this straw man is a price cap of 50 basis points. That sounds radical. The existing DC landscape will continue on, and they'll create some new auto-enrolment solutions. And these new auto-enrolment solutions may be called MySaver. But here's where it gets similar with New Zealand. They're going to create a central processing authority that will generate the carousel. They will only select 4 providers. Wow, how do you select 4 providers? Good, that issue. How do you select 4 providers to offer these solutions? Good luck with that. And at the same time, they're going to change the tax approach. They'll move away from EET to TTE. Wow, you're saying you're going to exempt tax, contribution, income on fund, and how you take the money? Yeah, and then it's going to change to tax exempt. But it's not going to change for everything. It's only going to change for these auto-enrolment products. The existing DC arrangements will remain at EET. Are you confused? We're getting confusion here. But by 2022, Leo Varadkar, young man with a mission, he's the Irish equivalent of the Prime Minister, wants to do something. And he wants to do it fast because he's already been a pension minister and he's got the love of pensions. And he wants to make 6% contributions from the employer and 6% employees. And the question I'd ask you, New Zealanders, is New Zealand contributing enough for its KiwiSaver? And I hear all the comments from this side of the fence, this side of the fence. We've got New Zealand Super, Dave. Don't worry about it. But in Australia, we had the old age pension. We had a political risk coming called the means-tested benefit. When means testing brought in by Bob Hawke and Paul Keating came in, it wrecked a lot of lifestyles because people's pensions went into an old age means-tested runoff, and it was a concern. So this is what I raise about intergenerational fairness, the wealth gap is being addressed, and housing access in the post-global financial crisis. Especially in Ireland, they're targeting women. And women in terms of women who are having children later in life, women who are having to care for their mothers and their fathers, because let's be honest, it's generally women who do that, unpaid, and generally women are trying to re-enter the workforce in an auto-enrolment model. So there's a political risk also in the first pillar that exists in Ireland, in perpetuity. So the political cost of the IT system to drive this. You might say, how much is this going to cost? Well, Tim Duggan, bless him, he's a lovely guy, he always wants a fight. Tim and I, Nick's met him, Nick's got him going as well. Tim, who runs this, the Assistant Commissioner of the Policy Generator here on auto-enrolment, had said, this IT system will only cost 20 million euros. The real estimates are a cost of 100 million euros. They go and look at what happened with the Inland Revenue Department here, down in Wellington. How much did they spend, bless, on your auto-enrolment system? If you can find that out, please send me, courtesy of David Harris at 12financial.com. I can't find it. But the push by industry now is 70-30. They want to achieve 70% of the workforce, overall workforce, will be covered by auto-enrolment by 2030. Is this an ideal replacement rate that will be generated? But the critical thing here, wait for it, and I'll leave you with this thought, is employee choice versus employer choice. Around the world, it's left to the paternalism of the employer to choose investments, structures, etc. But what's happening in Ireland is that there will be employee choice, that the individual will be doing the choosing of the provider, and that's quite ambitious. So here's some questions and thoughts before I wrap up and I become the pseudo-echo of Calvert Duffy, is that does the country in New Zealand need to rethink retirement income policy and housing access and ownership? Annuities are a dirty word in this country. I go around and say, hey, what do you think of an annuity? And people go, you're mad. You're just mad. We've got a house. We go and buy a house when we retire and we rent that house and that generates a synthetic annuity and retirement income stream. Well, other countries like Chile and the UK very much are more in love with annuities, and same with our Ireland, and there's growth in the Australian market with regard to annuities. So I'm just putting my hands up, just throwing that on the table, pig on the table. Is there a need for New Zealand to embrace financial wellness approaches to better understand consumers? Get real, ladies and gentlemen. There is a lot of people who don't have enough money to save really for their retirement. Let's be honest. In a survey in 2016 by the Federal Reserve in the United States, surveyed 20,000 households, 46% of those households only could lay their hands on $400 of cash. That's all they could do. So how do you get these people motivated to say, hey, Eddie, you really need in Wisconsin to save for your retirement? So equal studies are being done in the UK, and what's happening, ladies and gentlemen, if I can leave you with something, it's called a rainy day account. A rainy day account or a sidecar being developed in the UK now and also in the US. By Madrian and others, Richard Thaler, compatriots and academics, and they're saying that individuals need to have access to an account which they can use as an emergency fund. Something to think about there, the KiwiSaver providers. Is generation issues and intergenerational fairness ideal for the future of New Zealand? A wealth gap? And I keep on saying, thank you, Michael, and is there a need for Indigenous providers to create infrastructure for future generations? The argument that a lot of industry funds or with profits or profit for member funds are saying in the UK is that we feel happy that we are building things like Sydney Airport owned by those funds, etc., etc. The infrastructure, the building blocks of our economy is in the hands or working to develop and deepen for the economy and the people on a broader level. The challenge, though, is it right for those with-profit funds to go to the UK and own the King's Cross redevelopment, own parts of Bristol Airport, own parts of Birmingham Airport, and own 51% of Manchester Airport? Political risk for maintaining static first pillar pension solutions. Everybody says to me, we've got New Zealand Super. You go, it's really interesting. You can go out with New Zealanders to dinner, and the New Zealanders in the UK really live a great lifestyle. They like it, they have fun, they talk about how New Zealand's better than Australia, But then they talk about how we've got New Zealand Super and you will never get an old age pension, ha, ha, ha. And I said, that may be right, but what about the political risk? And they said, no, New Zealand Super is going to be there for my retirement. I said, really? Is it really? And I couldn't believe when Bob Hawke and Paul Keating brought in means testing in the mid-80s, but they did. So there's a political risk, I would argue, that's not being considered. And finally, is the levels of fees and charges appropriate for returns generated? Is KiwiSaver products in this country, do they charge too high? Is there higher by US standards, Irish standards, UK standards, or Australian standards? And what we announced today is we're going to do a study comparing your fees and charges with all these other countries. So that is where it ends there. on my presentation